Welcome aboard, everybody. Dr. Peter Glidden here. Thanks for your time. This is my worldwide webinar on depression. Depression from the holistic point of view, the naturopathic holistic point of view, which is a point of view which is in short supply in the 21st century. So let's just jump right into the deep end. The sad statistics concerning depression currently affects 19 million Americans. That's almost 10% of the population. Twice as many women as men are affected, and women over the age of 25 and under the age of 45 are the most affected. 50 years ago, the average age of onset of depression was 29 years of age. Today, are you ready? It's 15 years of age. Now, of course, conventional medicine has no explanation for this, and they'll tell you it's genetic because that's the false flag that they fly for everything that they're not sure of. Oh, it must be genetic. But that doesn't make sense, and I can tell you for a fact this is not a genetic problem. I mean, even a cursory understanding of genetics, right? Didn't Darwin argue for selection of the fittest? So if depression was truly genetically driven, then there should be less and less of it, not more and more of it. And of course, conventional medicine will argue, well, our diagnostic criteria have gotten more robust and more efficient. And so really there were just as many people depressed years ago as there are now. We just didn't know that. And I disagree completely. I would argue that depression is on the rise because the quality of and the amount of nutrients, especially minerals in our food, is decreasing dramatically. And people are growing up walking around planet Earth in bodies that are egregiously undernutrified. So their brain and central nervous system can't work. Their brain and central nervous system simply cannot work the way that nature and God intended it to. And I'm of the opinion that this is the main driver of the depressive event. Now, here's some startling statistics. According to Harvard Medical School, this by the National Centers for Health Statistics, the rate of antidepressant use in this country among teens and adults, that's anybody over the age of 12, if you can believe it, has increased by almost 400% from 1988 to 1944, and again from 2005 to 2008. And now we're in 2018. Do you think these numbers have increased or decreased? They have increased. This is because we have a medical monopoly. We're in the middle of a medical monopoly. We don't have a free medical market. Nobody even knows how to pronounce naturopathy, let alone know what a naturopathic doctor is capable of. And, insurance doesn't pay for it. Health Canada doesn't pay for anything other than MD-directed medical treatments. And when MDs try to wrap their heads around the depressive event and the treatment thereof, all that they have for it is drugs, 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 and drugs. That's the only thing they can throw at it. And even though, interestingly enough, as we're about to see, drugs have been proven to be not as effective as placebo. But like the fella said, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when the medical doctors see somebody with depression, they're going to prescribe a pharmaceutical, which we're going to get into in a little bit. So, conventional medical doctors are really, really good at categorizing things. And with depression, there's no exception. So these are the types of depression that the medical doctors recognize, varying shades of gray as far as I'm concerned. Atypical depression, which is the most abundant type of depression beginning in the teenage years. Usually this is probably what most people think about when they think about someone who says they're depressed. Then, of course, there's bipolar depression, which is depressive events alternating with mania, hyperactivity, and then depression, and then hyperactivity, and then depression. Interestingly enough, in 1997, suicide was the leading cause of death in 10 to 24-year-olds. Can you imagine a 10-year-old killing themselves? I would argue that this is a 20th century phenomenon, a 21st century phenomenon. We have clinical depression, which is like deep, dark voodoo daddy depression, like really dark, deep depression where people they just absolutely positively can't do anything, and life is really bad for them. And then there are different types of kind of weird depression called cyclothymia and dysthymia. And then, of course, I guess, according to the medical doctors, there's the elderly depression, which is depression just because you're old. Which begs the question, do the medical doctors, these distinctions that the medical doctors draw are somewhat arbitrary, and from my point of view, they're telling, because the medical doctor doesn't even know what causes heartburn, and they don't even know what causes depression. They have no idea what the operative cause of depression is. And so they're inclined to categorize things like this. Perhaps it makes them feel better about their, intellectual ineptitude. But nonetheless, this is the inside out, upside down, Alice through the looking glass world of 21st century medicine, which we are deeply in the grips of. And of course, when the medical doctors attempt to intervene with somebody who is depressed in any of these categories, it's pharmaceuticals. And there are many different types of antidepressants. MAO inhibitors, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, tricyclic antidepressants, tetracyclic antidepressants, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, serotonin, norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, right? With the medical doctors, when they intervene with something, it's about exerting a hostile takeover of the biochemistry of the body. After all, it's an antidepressant, right? So the thought process here is, from the MD's point of view, the human body is a bag of biochemicals waiting to break. And when something does break, it's not the doctor's job to cure it, because the rationale is, well, if the body could cure it, it never would have gotten broken in the first place. It's the medical doctor's job to manage it. And how do they manage it? Well, they develop synthetic pharmaceuticals, which in this case mess with your brain chemistry. They exert a hostile takeover of your brain chemistry. It's kind of like drinking tequila or vodka to make yourself feel better. Well, it's a drugged effect. It's not a natural state of joy or ease or clarity or euphoria. It's a drugged state. It's a hostile takeover of the biochemistry, in this case of your brain, in order to get to a desired outcome. And ironically, one of life's greatest unrecognized ironies here is, with the medical doctors, it's all about the research and the scientific method, and we have to double blind, placebo control everything. We have to lean on the research, boys and girls, in order to justify our treatments, and that's why we're number one. Well, ironically, when the research doesn't include drugs, the medical doctors ignore it. The research has been done that for the most typical type of depression, antidepressants simply don't work. I mean, they don't work. They're no better than placebo. And there have been numerous studies that have proven this. This is an academic point. Nobody argues it. And yet medical doctors don't prescribe placebo. They prescribe drugs, even though the drugs, as we will see, have serious side effects. A review of all antidepressant trials submitted to the FDA from 1987 to 2004. Let's do the math there. That's 17 years of published data on antidepressants has shown that around half of the trials failed to show any benefit over placebo. So in the span of 17 years, half of the published studies showed that the drugs, the antidepressants, were no better than placebo. No better than placebo. Another meta-analysis done by the US, the United Kingdom, and Canada, this was published in 2008, surveyed all pharmaceutical company-sponsored drug trials, all of them, on the 6 most widely used new generation antidepressants, which were submitted for approval to the FDA between 87 and 99. That is 9 plus 3, 13 years. 12 years, the results showed that the difference in efficacy between antidepressants and placebo was minimal. Again, antidepressants were just about as effective as placebo was in helping people not feel depressed. Placebo better than Prozac. May 7th, 2002. An article titled "Against Depression, a Sugar Pill is Hard to Beat" stated a new analysis has found that in the majority of trials conducted by drug companies in recent decades, sugar pills have done as well as or better than antidepressants. And this was when Prozac was introduced to the marketplace. This was a very famous study in the counterculture of alternative medicine, you know, the alternative medicine community in the world. We all knew this. This was published. And yet, even though the published data showed that the placebo was better than Prozac, of course, medical doctors prescribe Prozac. And to add insult to injury, I talked about this in my first book, The MD Emperor Has No Clothes. L-tryptophan, which is very effective, it's an amino acid which is very effective at helping to mitigate the symptoms of depression, was banned by the Food and Drug Administration at the same time that Prozac was launched because they didn't want to have any competition. And the rationale behind the banning of L-tryptophan was that it was dangerous. And interestingly enough, in the same time span that they banned L-tryptophan because of its danger, they were doing studies at the same time to prove the effectiveness of L-tryptophan in infectious diseases. And, you know, again, follow the money. And the ban on L-tryptophan was lifted about 10 years later, but nobody remembered that it had ever been in place. And because of politics and Prozac and power, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Prozac, less effective than placebo. And what about our naturally occurring amino acid L-tryptophan? Well, even better. But really, the greatest eye-opener here, from my point of view, and this is really a big deal, so I'm going to spend some time on this. In 2004, that's 14 years ago, the FDA issued a black box warning on antidepressants. And a black box warning on a drug is as strong a warning as you can get. It is as strong a warning as you can get. It's like, you know, red alert. Okay. It's not a yellow alert. It's not an amber alert. It's a red alert, indicating that antidepressants were associated with an increased risk of suicidal ideation and behavior in young people, which means if your teenager is depressed and takes antidepressants and are prescribed antidepressants, your teenager is prescribed antidepressants, the use of the antidepressant dramatically increases the chances that that child is going to commit suicide. Meanwhile, the published literature conclusively shows that placebo is as effective or better than antidepressants with no side effects. So why on earth would a medical doctor put your child's life at risk by committing suicide by prescribing an antidepressant when placebo works just as well or better? Why would they do that? What kind of human being would do that? Well, a medical doctor would do that. And this is another nail in the coffin, ladies and gentlemen, that your medical doctor, there's something wrong with the way that medical doctors think. There's something wrong. They are not well-rounded, well-grounded, evolved human beings. There's something wrong there. Why would you do that, given the published data to support a non-dangerous alternative? because you're not a normal human being. And, I'm trying to be politically correct here, as politically correct as I can, but as far as I'm concerned, the use of antidepressants in the teenage population by medical doctors is, in light of all of the published research to the contrary and the dangers thereof, black box warnings, red alert, and yet you go ahead and prescribe an antidepressant, you have to be sick in the head yourself in order to do that, in my opinion. And when I'm appointed Surgeon General of the United States, any medical doctor that prescribes an antibiotic for mild depression in a teenager is going to go to jail. It's that simple. Now, and all of the school shootings now that we have, right? Studies have also shown that the use of antidepressants and antipsychotics leads to violent behavior. And a great number of the people who were involved with the mass murders at the churches and the schools were taking antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs. And yet there's no conversation about the ramifications thereof. And well, maybe the desire to get up and mow down innocent children with semi-automatic weapons was a function of the pharmaceutical. Why aren't we having that conversation? I'll tell you why we're not having that conversation. Because we don't have a free medical market, and there is gigantic money in the antidepressant and antipsychotic psychiatric world. Follow the money, baby. Now, there is light here. There is hope. There are things that we can do other than Machiavellian mainstream MD madness, right? And, remember, look, thank God for Novocaine. It's not the drug, it's how it's used, right? So this isn't a diatribe against pharmaceuticals. This is a diatribe against antidepressants for low-grade depression, because the published literature proves that they don't work and they're dangerous. So why would you use them? So there are alternatives to this madness, and let's talk about them now. Basically, if you followed me long enough, you're going to be able to tell me what we should do here, because it's really not rocket science. So we fill the body's nutritional tank up, not with fractionated nutrition. We don't give boatloads of vitamin C or boatloads of vitamin B or vitamin D injections. We give all 90 essential nutrients in doses which match the body weight, in recipes that the body can actually absorb relatively efficiently. And we counsel people to stop eating food that hurts their body. We get out of the way, and we see how far back the body bounces. And of course, you all know now how to get the 90 essential nutrients into your body. Beyond Tangy Tangerine, plant-derived minerals, Beyond OsteoFX powder, I prefer, and the Prohoba Omegas. 90 essential nutrients, bada bing, bada boom, fill up your nutritional tank and give your body a fighting chance to normalize its brain chemistry, right? Now, there's another thing to consider here, food allergies. And food allergies are something that I haven't discussed very much because it's a somewhat complex, complicated issue, and nonetheless, it bears a little bit of time and description here, okay? So there are basically two classifications of food allergies that people are familiar with. Most people, quite frankly, are only familiar with one classification. That's an immediate hypersensitivity reaction. That's when the child eats a peanut and the airways swell up, and you have to give him the EpiPen or he's going to die of suffocation because of an allergic reaction to the peanut or whatever it is that he's allergic to or she's allergic to. Well, there's another class of allergic reactions, which are called long-term delayed hypersensitivity reactions. Not immediate hypersensitivity, but delayed hypersensitivity reaction. And this is what naturopathic doctors specialize in. We really wrote the book here about this type of allergic reaction. And this type of an allergic reaction has it's a delayed effect on the body, but the effect is often extreme and profound, especially in children, young children who have, wide open emotional bodies, and they haven't developed, they don't have the emotional development yet. Their central nervous systems haven't developed to the point where they can rein things in. So watching how children react to the consumption of foods that they're allergic to is very telling about the intensity of the effect. Now, the leading researcher here, who has really deserves a Nobel Prize as far as I'm concerned, is a medical doctor named Doris Rapp. And I'm going to show you a video now that Doris Rapp recorded decades ago, which is from her clinic, and she gives you some examples of what exactly food allergies can do to children. Put a big heavy object on your head. I'm about to make your brain explode.
We'd now like to show you how some children change in behavior, in activity, and in appearance because of some environmental factors. The first case we want to show you is a little 3-year-old boy, and we're going to see what happens to him after he drinks orange juice. Isn't it surprising that he changes this much, this quickly, and in this way? Now let's look at this 5-year-old boy who is being tested for chlorine. Notice how nice he is before he's tested. He's adorable. And now look at him. He's trying to fight his father. He's actually flopping. He's trying to hit his dad. He's hollering. He's uncontrollable. Would you believe that this could happen to a youngster from one drop of a chlorine allergy expert? Now let's look at this little 3-year-old boy. He's going to eat some sugar cubes. He's about 6 or 8 of them. And within 20 minutes, look at what happens to him. He's obviously irritated. He's angry. He's not acting the way he should. And when we give him the correct pollution of sugar, look at him. He's adorable. Now let's look at this 8-year-old boy. He's being tested with an allergy extract of his brother. Look at how he acts. He is so angry. He almost looks demonic. He wants to fight his mother. At one point, he put his finger in her eye and he said, "Fine. Let's look at this youngster. We're testing this boy for sugar. His mother has to physically hold him down because he's trying to fight him. He's trying to hit her. What do you think would happen if she let loose?
Okay, so I'm not sure how much of that audio that came through, and this is one of the problems in a live production, but it's clear to see that children were normal, and then they were given food that they were allergic to, or exposed to an environmental toxin, an environmental substance that they had an allergic reaction to, and their behavior went through the roof, and it took about 15 minutes. Crazy behavior, right? Aggressive behavior. Cursing and swearing and biting and kicking and scratching at the parents. Not because there's anything wrong with the child behaviorally, right? They don't have a psychosis. They were exposed to something that they were allergic to. And it messed with their brain chemistry a big time. Generated really bad behavior a big time. Now, the net negative effects from being exposed to something that you're allergic to doesn't go away when you grow up. When you get older, you develop coping mechanisms and you internalize all of that stress. All of that crazy brain chemistry becomes internalized, and this develops, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the leading causes, I believe, of depression in teenagers and violent outbursts. And in adults as well. And it's completely unrecognized and completely undealt with. Nobody has any clue about this. You're never, ever, ever going to hear a medical doctor tell you, oh, you're feeling depressed. Well, you need to consider the fact that you're suffering from food allergies. You're never going to hear that. And you need to hear that. So the diagnosis of a food allergy is a tricky, difficult thing. There are labs that have blood tests that attempt to discern which foods you're allergic to. I'm not comfortable recommending anybody use any of these labs because as far as I'm concerned, the data just is too fuzzy. And there needs to be more research done. And this is why we need an independent, holistic research organization. It's why we need this. We need to figure this stuff out. So my basic rule here for all around medical nutrition for the masses help is if you are struggling with depression, it's entirely possible that the food that you're eating may have a lot to do with it. So what are we going to do? We're going to stop eating the 12 bad foods because many of these foods are the foods that people are allergic to. Many of the foods in the 12 bad food list are also foods that people develop allergies to, and it makes them crazy. So the first thing to do, as far as food modification goes, is eliminate the 12 bad foods. And then look to see how you feel. Fill your body's nutritional tank up every day with the 90 essential nutrients. See how you feel. Now, after you've done this for a couple of months, actually, you can start right away. But it gets easier to gauge this the longer that you're involved in the program. Everybody's got smartphones now, and the smartphones have capabilities to make notes to yourself, right? So the next time, every time that you feel like your depression surges, right, and which will happen, people that have mild depression, mild to moderate depression, they have times throughout the day when the depression increases, right? Sometimes it's a regular schedule. Sometimes it's a random schedule. So when your depression increases, I want you to write down on your smartphone in the memo app the very last thing that you had to eat or drink. And then you keep a running list of that. After the third or the fourth time that you've written stuff down, there should be similarities on that list. And in addition to the 12 bad foods, it's the foods that are on that list that are similar that you should also eliminate because you're having a reaction to them. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a much better way to gauge your reaction to food than doing expensive laboratory testing, which is non-sensitive and non-specific results. Okay? Now, of course, if you are suffering from a food allergy, a delayed hypersensitivity reaction to a food, then that's a problem with the small intestine. And so to help the small intestine fix itself, optimize its structure and function, we give the MAC-E Plus. So in addition to the 90 essential nutrients and the dietary discipline, for the first month, you get 3 bottles of MAC-E Plus. For the second month, 2 bottles, and the third month, 1 bottle of MAC-E Plus. Then you shouldn't need any more. And that's an excellent addition to the program if you find that food does in fact alter your mood. And you know, it's quite fascinating. It's really, really, really fascinating when you start to look at this. Because it's a delayed reaction, people miss it. So, you know, they'll have something that's not good for them that they're going to have a reaction to at 12 o'clock. And at 12:25, they crash. And because it was 25 minutes later, and because they were never taught this, they missed the fact that it was the food that they ate 25 minutes before that elicited the response. And so they miss it. And so what do? They have more of the same food later and they crash again. And then they run to the medical doctor's office and they get a drug that doesn't fix the problem, that actually compounds the problem. So this is a relatively important piece of information to understand. Okay. So we've got the general overall nutrition. We've got the food allergy aspect. And it is entirely possible that if you're depressed, you are suffering. Your depression is caused solely by a blood sugar issue. I am of the opinion that undiagnosed blood sugar issues are one of the major overlooked contributors to the depressive event. And look, when it comes to blood sugar issues, there are a lot of shades of gray, from an inability to metabolize blood sugar to frank diabetes, either type 1 or type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of gray area in between when you might actually be struggling with a blood sugar issue, but you go in for lab work and all the labs look normal. So you can't lean exclusively on objective laboratory discovery to help you see whether or not blood sugar is an issue for you. It's a component, but there's other ways to figure this out. So if you regularly get sleepy after you eat a meal, especially if the meal is high in carbohydrates, right, and or frank sugars, then you have a blood sugar issue if it happens on a regular basis. And or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're wide awake after only a couple hours sleep, you feel like you slept all night, you had 2 hours sleep, 3 hours sleep, you're like wide awake, you have a blood sugar issue. And if any of these things happen, well, what do? We do Sweeties. Get a bottle or two of the Sweeties. The recommendation, 1 bottle per 75 pounds per month, and you take divided doses before meals. It's important, if you're taking Sweeties here, to take the dose on a regular basis. Regular basis. You want to take it at the same time every day, more or less. Same time every day. And not a bad idea to take more for the first couple of months. So, maybe dial in the dose per your body weight and then get 1 extra bottle. That's how we do it. So there's 120 caps in 1 bottle. So that's 4 caps per bottle per day. So if you have 2 bottles, you're going to take 4 caps twice a day. If you have 3 bottles, you're going to take 4 caps 3 times a day. It's like that. Whatever you do, however many you take, try to take them at the same time every day, preferably before a meal or at the very beginning of a meal. Now, you can watch the webinar that I did on blood sugar, but there's a test you can order, a blood test. It's called hemoglobin A1C, hemoglobin A1C, hemoglobin A1C, which will help you objectively see whether or not your blood sugars are, in fact, problematic. I also wrote extensively about that in my second book, Attempt a Cure. Now, there's another thing that can be contributing here to someone who's depressed, and this is adrenal fatigue. Your adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys, and your adrenal glands secrete adrenal hormones, adrenaline being one of them, cortisol being another. And these are stress hormones. And, most of us, and I don't know how this happened, but it just seems to be a function of life. Like, we're stressed about things all the time. Like, do you know anybody that's not stressed about anything? I don't. Consistent consumption of caffeine also puts stress on the adrenal glands. So if you drink regular cups of coffee, your adrenal glands are probably suffering, and you probably have a mild or moderate degree of adrenal fatigue. And if you do have adrenal fatigue, your energy and your mood are going to be affected, because that's what adrenal fatigue does. You feel like you're in second gear all the time. You just can't shift it up. You just can't, no matter how hard you try. And your sleep is screwed up. And another sign of adrenal fatigue is your mind races, especially when you're trying to go to bed. Your mind is just racing with all kinds of things. So there's an old-fashioned naturopathic test for adrenal fatigue. And again, I cannot tell you how reliable this is, but I would do it just for giggles. So you get a little pen light, or you can use the light on the back of your cell phone, right? Little flashlight app on your cell phone. You go into the bathroom, turn off all the lights. You need to go into a dark room with a mirror, right? You need to have a mirror in front of you at eye level in a completely dark room. And I mean dark. I don't want light filtering in through the window, okay? So go into a closet if there's windows in your bathroom. with a mirror. You stay in the darkened room for about a minute to let your eyes adjust to the darkness. And then you look in the mirror and you take the pen light and you shine it in one eye. You shine it in one eye. Now, when you're in the dark room, your pupils will be really big. And then when you shine the light in one eye, the pupil will constrict. You can see it. The pupil, by the way, is the black part of your eye. It'll be really big. Then you shine the light on it and it constricts, right? Goes to about half of its size. Now, you keep shining the light, and if after the pupil constricts, it bounces back, expands a little, and then constricts, expands, constricts, expands, constricts, you probably have a problem with your adrenal glands. If you have healthy adrenal glands, the pupil, it constricts and stays there. But if it bounces, you have a problem with your adrenals, most probably. Now, this is a down and dirty, old-fashioned way, and, you know, there is another way. There's an objective laboratory test that's done. You can order this yourself. You don't need a medical doctor or a naturopathic doctor or anybody. Go to directlabs.com. It's the Adrenal Stress 24-hour Saber Science Kit, $209. So if you do this test, you have to follow these instructions because they tell you it's a saliva sample, like 6 saliva samples, I believe. But you have to take them at very specific times of the day. That's very important if you do this test. So make sure if you're going to spend the money to do this test, you do it correctly. So you got to set an alarm, you know, on your cellular device or somehow. And every time the alarm goes off, you got to spit in the sample tube. Okay. And this test will give you a really good, objective, scientific idea of how well your adrenal glands are functioning. God bless me. How well your adrenal glands, don't you love live presentations? How well your adrenal glands are functioning. And the report is really easy to understand. You should be able to know yourself. If you're smart enough to pass the driver's license test, you're smart enough to understand the adrenal function test. And if it shows that your adrenal glands are in need of assistance, then what do? We thank God for Good Herbs Adrenal Health. The recommendation, 2 milliliters 3 times a day, 2 mLs 3 times a day. There's a little milliliter mark on the dropper inside the bottle. 2 milliliters 3 times a day, like, you know, regularity. 2 milliliters 3 times a day. I don't care when you do it. Between meals, with a meal, before a meal, I don't care. Spread out the doses. And then again, 2 milliliters as needed when you crash. 2 milliliters as needed when you crash. And as you do this, the first month, you're going to be taking a lot of this stuff. And then the second month, not so much. And then the third month, not so much. And as you go down the road with this, you're going to need less and less and less and less of it. And it's a 3-month protocol. Usually you only need this for 3 months. And this is a really good thing to do. And, you know, look, I have colleagues who have built a very financially lucrative naturopathic business by leaning on the notion that everybody's adrenal glands are fatigued. You walk into their office, you're going to walk out with some type of adrenal support. You know, and I don't paint with that broad of a brush, but the moral to this story is that this is often an unrecognized contributor to feeling blue. Your adrenal glands need help, and here we are to the rescue. Okay? Now, one last thing to talk about. The wonderful botanical medicine, Hypericum perforatum. That's the Latin name for St. John's wort. St. John's wort is a remarkably effective botanical medicine with 0 side effects for mild to moderate depression. And it's been proven with numerous studies to be as or more effective than antidepressants. No side effects. More effective than placebo. More effective than serotonin reuptake inhibitors. More effective than tricyclic antidepressants. And why have you not heard about it? Well, because you don't live in Europe. In the European Union, especially Germany, the use of hypericum is $1 billion industry. Billions of dollars of this product is sold every year in Europe for depression. Yet in the United States, you've probably not even heard of it. Why? Because we don't have a free medical market here. They certainly don't have a free medical market in Europe, but they're much more inclined to be open-minded in Europe about the use of botanical medicines therapeutically, especially in Germany. Now, one thing that they do in the European Union, which is silly, and which you need not do, and by the way, there's no place in longevity to get St. John's wort. You have to go outside. So, and I've spoken about this in my videos about Good Herbs, the Good Herbs Company. And one of the things that the Good Herbs Company does is they do not select ingredients from a botanical medicine and concentrate them. Every other herb company in the world will do that. So when you're buying or looking for a St. John's wort supplement, you're going to see on the label standardized to contain X amount of constituent. If you see those words, this product has been standardized to contain X amount of this ingredient, don't get it. You need to find a St. John's wort supplement that has not been standardized. Because when you standardize something, that means you think you're smarter than God and you're smarter than nature. So you take the plant out of the ground, you extract all of the constituents from the plant, and then you selectively pick one or two of them. You take them into a laboratory, you synthesize them, and then you make a lot of those, and then you throw it back into the mix, which is what you deliver as a medicine. It's nuts. But this is a big deal in the European Union, especially Germany. And it's a facsimile of the reductionistic way of thinking, right? Because they look at herbs the same way they look at drugs. They're trying to exert a hostile takeover of the metabolism of your body, but this time with an herb instead of a pharmaceutical. When you use a botanical medicine holistically, when you don't standardize anything in it, you use everything that's in it in the ratios that it appeared, you're going to get a much better result. And I don't have a recommendation for a St. John's wort supplement. Of course, when we're talking about botanical medicines, we always want to have an alcohol extract. So you want to find an alcohol extract of the St. John's wort that has not been standardized, an alcohol tincture of St. John's wort that has not been standardized. And we take the dose the same way that we did the adrenal health at 2 milliliters 3 times daily, and then 2 milliliters again as needed when you're feeling like you've crashed and burned. Okay? This is how we do it. Really pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Take the 90 essential nutrients appropriate for body weight. Eliminate the 12 bad foods. Do a diet diary and look to see if there are any negative reactions that you experience when you eat a food. If there are, remove those foods from the diet. Supplement with the Maquis Plus for 3 months. In addition to that, check to see if your adrenal glands are in functioning condition. Do the pupil test or lay down the money for that test from Direct Labs. And if the adrenal glands are in need of support, give them that support with the Good Herbs Adrenal Health. Look to see if your blood sugar is problematic. If your blood sugar is problematic, you're going to be waking up in the middle of the night wide awake, and or you fall asleep after you eat a meal. and or your hemoglobin A1C levels through blood work are elevated. If that's the case, take the sweeties, couple bottles a month. Divide the doses and look to see how you feel. And then for the icing on the cake, use St. John's wort if necessary. And generally speaking, what we're attempting to do here is support and promote and stimulate the body's natural ability to fix itself. Now, everybody needs the 90 essential nutrients for the rest of their life. It's mandatory. But you might not need the sweeties for the rest of your life, and you're definitely not going to need the herbal treatment for the rest of your life. We say try it for 90 days first. See what it does, and then slowly start to withdraw from the extracurricular stuff and just lean on the 90 essential nutrients and see how you do. Depression is a horrible thing. You know, if you have a broken bone, you're walking around with your arm in a cast, right? Everybody sees that and everybody has sympathy for you. But if you're depressed or you have chronic fatigue or adrenal fatigue, nobody can see that there's anything wrong with you. And so you don't get any sympathy from anybody. And most people, because they're stupid, think, oh, you know, you're just lazy. Snap out of it, which is ridiculous on its face. So I hope you learned something here. I am your steadfast advocate for health, Dr. Peter Glidden. God willing and the creek don't rise. I will see you next time. Thanks so much for your continued support.